Hey Craig, I'm really excited for the USB-C iPhone next year. Who's to say that a USB-C iPhone is actually happening? Well, you said it though. I mean, you said you were gonna comply with the EU law. Yeah, but the EU law was just simply stating that we had to use USB-C if there was a port in the first place. Oh god, Craig, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? I'm just saying, if we find a little technicality in there, got rid of the port entirely, I think we could technically still be in the European Union. How cool is that? Do you realize how few people like your iPhones right now? You want to find out how little people are gonna like the iPhone after you get rid of a port? Well, this will just be like the headphone jack all over again. We can sell our solutions like we did with AirPods. Did you figure out charging over the air? Oh no, that would be cool. So did you figure out something better than MagSafe? No, I guess we think MagSafe is fine. You didn't think through this, did you? No. Who's to say? Why don't you take this back to the drawing board and come back when you've decided on USB-C? What? I have no idea what you're talking about. Let's begin. So let's be very clear from the beginning, MKBHD, in my opinion, is the best tech channel on YouTube. I watch pretty much all of his videos. I've been following him for years. He's pretty much the only tech creator that is able to make things interesting and has incredible cinematography, great alliterations in his outros, and basically, I don't want to hear any counterpoints. He is the best tech creator. He's pioneered the genre. He stayed surprisingly relevant over the years compared to others who have dwindled off. So don't fight me on that. MKBHD is the best. However, that does not necessarily mean I agree with all of his opinions. In fact, part of the reason I love getting his perspective is because it tends to conflict with mine. And I'm not trying to do response videos to spark drama or say that I don't like Marques or you should stop watching him. I'm actually trying to tell you should stop watching me and watch him because he's a better content creator. But he did a video recently that you should absolutely watch, and if you haven't watched it yet, something's wrong with you. But it essentially breaks down the argument as to why he doesn't believe that the iPhone will go to USB-C because of this new EU law that has passed, that is going into the effect near the end of 2024. His prediction is essentially that the iPhones will start being shipped with MagSafe pucks starting next year, and then by the time the law goes into effect, they will just ship a portless iPhone. And I appreciate the skepticism. I think it's very good for you to not believe every headline you see, and there's definitely way too many people using the term confirmed, but I still disagreed with his predictions and wrote down a couple notes as to why I think that the iPhone will go through with USB-C, but it's important to acknowledge from the beginning, no one actually knows. No one is truly aware of what Apple's inner thoughts are. That's why I neglected using the term confirmed in the title, but there's some logic that I think could be fundamentally flawed by the several creators who have been saying, even though there's a USB-C law passed, and while yes, this does confirm the death of Lightning is coming in the next couple years, that doesn't necessarily mean that the iPhone is getting USB-C. So let me argue as to why I think it does. So Marques is very good in his videos at making subjects a lot easier to understand and simplifying a lot of topics, which as you can tell by the runtime of this video, I'm not very good at that. I just kind of ramble and then throw all my thoughts on the internet all at once. But in his video, he didn't really provide the context of the question that the Wall Street Journal was asking Craig and Joz. He just provided the answer, which is that, you know, Joz never explicitly said they're going to release a USB-C iPhone. All Joz said was that they'll have to comply to EU law. But the question that was asked before he gave his long-winded answer was, is the iPhone or is Apple switching to USB-C?
And so that's creating a little bit of friction. In fact, the EU has approved legislation to create a common charger. In fact, they said in a press release yesterday, in 2024, a USB-C port will become mandatory for a whole range of electronic devices such as mobile phones, tablets, and headphones. I think that includes you guys. Is Apple moving to USB-C?
Well, maybe I can step back a little.
Then he gave his long answer as how he's upset with how they're being forced to, but yes, they will have to comply. So while yes, I agree there's a lot of clickbait headlines and a lot of people that say things are confirmed before they are, I do think it's important to provide the context of the question, which is that the interviewer was asking specifically, will the iPhone switch to Type-C, because this whole Lightning versus Type-C thing is creating a lot of confusion and a lot of friction in the world. Joz was saying, we don't agree with the method, but we'll have to comply. I guess you could interpret that as that means they're gonna go portless, but to me, the way he answered it was all pointing to, yes, that is the inevitable outcome. I feel like he could have said, well, we don't have to, or he could have taken an even more cop-out answer if their plans was to go portless ultimately. They could have said, well, there's a lot of exciting charging methods and exciting developments we're looking forward to. But instead, he said, hey, this is wrong. We don't like this law, and we don't think this is how this law should have gone about. And if you watch the entirety of that interview, his argument is that this is going to cause a lot of e-waste because lightning cables are by far one of the most common cables in the world, because there's over 1 billion active iPhone users, most of which have more than one lightning cable. And his argument is that ditching the lightning cable is going to make a lot of these cables useless. So Marques mentioned in his video that he doesn't want to talk about e-waste in Apple because that's all PR baloney, and Apple has removed ports in the past from their MacBooks or from their computers, and that didn't stop them. But again, providing context to this interview, the reason it's so important to them with Lightning is that is by far the most common connector aside from USB-C in the planet. It's not as common as people's interactions with USB-A or people's interaction with FireWire. Lightning is now at the scale with iPhones being more popular than they've ever been. Today, there's a larger iPhone user base than there's ever been. So that's why Apple's considering e-waste a tad more with this subject, because the iPhone sells at more volume than any other Apple product. And I think that understanding the e-waste argument is crucial to understanding why USB-C is the right move, because for one, that's why the European Union is enforcing this law. And if you want to take back that argument and say, well, Apple is Apple and they're going to go portless, there's no way around this statement. Going portless will create more e-waste than switching to USB-C. Apple has to be aware of this. They're already selling Lightning to USB-C adapters as we speak. You can easily manufacture, as many companies already have, Lightning to USB-C adapters. You can easily convert every Lightning cable on Earth into a USB-C cable because it's pins aligning with pins. There's not much energy loss there, and Apple could easily just ship a Lightning to USB-C adapter with every USB-C iPhone and say, boom, however you were charging your last iPhone, you can still charge with this iPhone. Even at 5 watts, USB-C works. You cannot make a Lightning to MagSafe adapter that works with every Lightning cable. Many Lightning cables are still attached to 5-watt bricks, and 5 watts cannot sustain a MagSafe wireless charge. MagSafe needs like at least 18 watts, preferably 20. And if you want to go the environmental route, wireless charging is less energy efficient than wired charging, which I don't think is a big deal because smartphone energy consumption is like nothing in the grand scheme of things. But Apple is boasting like a clean energy charging toggle now in battery settings. So if you want to get all technical about what's the most environmentally friendly way to charge your iPhone, wired is still going to beat wireless. And there's a lot of accessories that are not just for charging. If you want to talk about Lightning headphones or Lightning microphones or wired CarPlay, there's actually still a bunch of new vehicles coming out today that don't support wireless CarPlay. So you make a portless iPhone, suddenly that phone is incompatible with all of these wired CarPlay vehicles. Whereas if you sell a USB-C to Lightning adapter, you can still use wired CarPlay with the USB-C iPhone. So there's no way you can fix MagSafe to make it more energy efficient or try to do data over MagSafe because it doesn't have any pins. And if you're not transmitting data through a smart connector or through pins on the back, it has to be done via radio waves, which can be achieved via Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. And if you're using Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, you don't need a puck. You can do that from several feet away. So there's no way around it, in my view. USB-C will result in less e-waste than going portless. So as Apple is publicly stating now they care about e-waste and they want to reduce that, this is the only way to comply with the EU law and reduce e-waste. The other funny thing that I feel like people are forgetting, because Marques as well as others have mentioned in their videos that Apple wants to go portless. They've been planning on going portless for years. The only reason we know that is not because of Craig or Jaws or Tim. None of these guys ever came forward in an interview saying they want to make a portless iPhone. We're all basing that off of rumors. We're all basing that off of leakers and analysts that for years have been saying a portless iPhone is around the corner. And Marques linked it. It's his first video in the description of his latest one that says, yeah, I did a whole video on portless iPhones. That whole video is based on a report that Mark Gurman did. Mark Gurman collabed with MKBHD in that video. Guess what Mark Gurman is saying right now? USB-C is practically a lock-in. He says it's already decided. And Mark Gurman doesn't get everything right, so I'm not saying Mark Gurman confirms this is the direction Apple is going. I'm just saying that everybody who's relying on Apple wants to go portless, Apple's been trying to go portless for years, you're basing that off of leakers and rumors. And right now, all of the leakers and rumors are pointing towards USB-C. Mark Gurman, who's not entirely accurate but has gotten a lot of things right, is the one saying that USB-C is obviously the next step. That's where Apple's headed. Ming-Chi Kuo is also saying USB-C is coming up for the next year's iPhone. While there's people speculating that Apple's gonna be Apple about it and go portless, basically no leakers or analysts right now are claiming that the next iPhone is gonna go portless. So I'm not saying that's confirmation that the USB-C iPhone is happening. I'm simply stating that if you want to fall back on here's what the rumors, here's what the leaks are saying, no, they don't agree with the portless iPhone theory. All the leakers and analysts right now are saying Apple is switching to Type-C. So don't reference previous analysts and previous leaks because they've all changed their mind. They've all changed their tune since then. The next reason I don't even think it will make sense for Apple to fight this on the EU is that if you look through the EU law, the phones are the biggest factor. This is the most popular device that the law affects. And guess what? Like 99% of non-iPhones in the EU, they're already using Type-C. Why would the EU enforce a law if everybody except Apple was already abiding by it? Basically, I'm trying to say this EU law is for Apple. They're specifically targeting the Lightning connector. They're specifically going after the iPhone and saying this needs to be a standard. So if Apple tries to sidestep it and find a loophole and be like, well, you technically said only if we have a port does it have to Type-C, so we got rid of the port, we figured it out, we got past the law. This doesn't solve the problem. The EU government, like it or not, has the power to enforce these kinds of laws, and if Apple tries to sidestep it, then the EU can go after Apple again. So I think Apple's gonna figure out, their executive team, that, okay, even if we tried to bypass this law and make a portless iPhone, that doesn't fix the fact that the EU wants a standardized connector. So they're going to change the law or pass a new law that redoes the wording of it so that they can't get by with a portless iPhone anymore. So this doesn't really end the battle. It just kind of prolongs the disagreement that the governments are going to have with Apple. And again, it's not just the EU. Brazil wants to pass this kind of law. India is making motions on this kind of law as well. It's not just the European Union. And I think that the war and the battle between the government and Apple would just be over if they switched to Type-C, whereas if they switch to portless, it just kind of prolongs the issue. And again, if you want to fall back on the rumors of Apple wanting to go portless, we've been hearing that for the past 5 years. In fact, MKBHD's video on the portless iPhone was alluding to the concept that the iPhone 13 may be portless. And here we are, iPhone 14, still not portless. So my argument as to why I think they're going to switch to Type-C is because there's clearly been opportunities for Apple to go portless, right? They could have technically done it as soon as they adopted Qi charging, which allegedly that's what Johnny Ive wanted to do. They wanted to ditch the Lightning port on the iPhone 10. There were a lot of changes with that iPhone. Maybe they could have gotten away with it. It had Qi charging, but they decided not to for some reason. And I think the reasons of keeping the port on the iPhone for factory resetting or for wired charging, it's easier to use the phone as it's charging, for the pre-existing accessories, and there's a lot of things that just don't work well wirelessly compared to wired. All of those reasons to keep the port are likely why Apple has pushed it off for so many years and kept the port on the iPhone 12, 13, 14, it's still here. So they could have gone portless years ago, and then I think the EU law would have had a much harder time getting this law passed, but they chose not to. They chose to keep it around for a reason, probably to reduce e-waste, which in that case, USB-C is the best way to keep e-waste down. And still, if your argument is, well, Apple's done these kind of weird law bypasses in the past, they might do it again. There's been a change in leadership recently. Evans Hankey, who took over for Johnny Ive for the chief of design, has announced their departure over the next 6 months. So previous behavior of Apple is not an indicator of future behavior at this point, because there's a lot of leadership shifting going on. In kind of the way Marquez ended his video, which was partially agreeing with Jaws, saying that governments shouldn't get too specific. Governments shouldn't step in the engineering field and say, you all need to adopt USB-C. They should just come up with a broader goal of like, we need to reduce e-waste or standardize power adapters, and then the engineers and the companies can figure out how to best enforce those laws, because Jaws said he's comfortable with governments issuing mandates, but he just doesn't want them to get that specific. I think the disconnect that's happening is that the EU law is all about not having specific cables for each device, because that will reduce the number of cables in e-waste. They just want to have one cable that can kind of cover everything, whereas Jaws is just thinking they mean, oh, you just mean power adapters. You want all power adapters to be the same, right? Even though all those have different wattages and sizes. But no, the EU law is about standardizing every cable can plug into every phone, which the only way to do that is if the device's ports all have the same connector. You can't expect Apple to come up with their own solution with that, because you're still going to need a Lightning cable if your logic is, well, let's just keep using the individual cable that makes the most amount of sense for that device. That doesn't achieve the same goal that the EU is setting out to achieve, and that's part of the reason that in the United States we have such a messy electric vehicle charging network, because there wasn't a standard agreed on. So we have the Tesla connector and we have CCS, whereas the European Union agreed very early on, CCS, this is the charging connector we're going to use. cars, and Tesla uses it, VW uses it, everybody agrees, so that you can drive basically any EV to pretty much any charge station and the cables and ports will work. So the EU, like it or not, is for that kind of standardization because it reduces complexity, and while yes, it's not a one-size-fits-all, certain USB-C cables are rated to a certain wattage, the power adapter solution that Apple came up with doesn't work either, but at least getting all of our devices on the same connector is a good place to start with. Then we can work on standardizing the cables and adapters down the road, because ultimately at least they will charge the device. It may not charge it at peak speeds, but at least all the cables and ports fit with each other. And the last point that I want to make that Marquez was kind of bringing up in his video that I disagree with is that USB-C is like the popular port that everyone knows now, but it's been around for a while. What if in a couple years something better comes along? Because, you know, companies are always innovating and always coming up with better connectors and better ports, but where I disagree is USB-C is not just another mobile connector, right? It's not like another Lightning, it's not like another 30-pin or micro USB. A lot of people think that that's where this direction is headed. You know, Lightning was good for a while, now USB-C is good for a while, but what about after that? No, with Apple and Intel and multiple companies working on this connector, they found one port design that not only works for phones or tablets, but also works on laptops, also works on monitors. It can transfer over 80 gigabits per second, and we've seen people test it at over 200 watts. How many freaking phones are charging 200 watts these days? Not that many. So what I'm trying to say is USB-C is not just another port that we can use for smartphones, I guess. No, this is a port with so much overhead that I don't believe smartphones are anywhere near close to getting the overhead where they're limited, like, oh man, I wish we could build an iPhone with 300 watt charging, but USB-C doesn't let us. I mean, first of all, you think Apple cares about fast wired charging? I mean, they've typically had like the slowest charging phones in the industry for years. And if your argument is, well, what if a better port comes along? Guess what? A better port did come along. It's USB-C. It has faster charging. It has faster data transfer speeds. It's more accessible, and there's already cables that exist that are USB-C that people already have in their households. So that helps reduce e-waste. But like, a better port came along that Apple helped work on, and they didn't adopt it to the iPhone. So what's your belief that there's going to be a USB Type D or Type F in the future that Apple's going to want to switch to when they won't even switch away from Lightning? I don't personally believe they would have, even if there was a better port design, but what's more crazy to me is the concept that there's going to be a better version of USB-C that's a different shape within the next couple years. No, we're not anywhere close to hitting the limitations of USB-C, and if we are, it's going to be with like, you know, big computers like the Mac Pro or custom-built PCs that are going to want HDMI 2.1 or 2.2 to handle like massive video resolution and outputs, which that's not the kind of use cases we're running into with iPhones. If Apple cared so much about the Made for iPhone program, why didn't they make faster versions of Lightning and use that on the iPads? Instead, they scrap Lightning across the iPad lineup for Type-C and boast about how much better it is. I don't think it's that far a stretch that they can boast about how much better a USB-C iPhone is either, and genuinely, I don't think there will be a better port for smartphones over the next 10 years, because we are not anywhere close to hitting the limits of USB-C, and battery life will improve in phones, cameras will improve in phones, but you really don't think 80 gigabits per second is gonna be enough when right now Apple is shipping 1 terabyte iPhones that are still limited to USB 2.0, and they can't build them fast enough. There's a supply chain shortage affecting them. Lots of people are perfectly content and happy with their 14 Pros, even though, like, the data speeds of that port are atrocious, and AirDrop wireless isn't that much better. So I still love MKBHD. I'm still a huge fan of the channel. I've watched him for years, and I'm sure I'm gonna keep watching him for years to come, but that's where I disagreed and why I ultimately think Apple will decide that USB-C is the best route. Also, just from a purely marketing perspective, you can upsell people on USB-C. Going portless, I think, will severely damage iPhone likability and sales. If people find out that to buy the new iPhone, they have to miss out on an entire charge port, they're gonna be like, ew, the new iPhone sucks. What's the point? The camera's not even that much better. I'm just gonna keep using my old iPhone because at least it has a charge port at all. USB-C, I'm sure, will get some annoyance. People will be like, what? No, I want to use Lightning. And Apple can just say, USB-C to Lightning adapter is included in the box. In fact, there's probably a ton of people that will say, oh, I preferred using Android, but now that the iPhone gets Type-C, it will work better in my cable ecosystem. I've seen those comments on my videos. Plus, what would be a better Apple selling tactic than saying, you can trade in your old Android phone and use the new iPhone 15, and it will work with your old Android phone charger because it has Type-C. What a great transitioning business tactic to tell people you don't have to switch everything to Lightning, making the conversion from Android to iOS easier than ever before. But of course, many of you may disagree. Feel feel free to let me know why you think portless might make more sense in Apple's mind, but just remember, it's not going to be for the e-waste argument. Personally, I think it would damage iPhone sales more than it would help MagSafe sales. And 3, this would not fix the EU coming after Apple. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I'll see you all in the next one.